Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, because someone might be waiting outside your door with an axe? That was a Viking's reality. Everyone knows the Vikings as fierce warriors, their long ships slicing through the sea like wolves hunting prey. But what people rarely consider is the brutal cost of that reputation. Life for a Viking wasn't a saga of endless victories. It was a relentless battle against nature, enemies, and even their own fate. It's the year 873, and in a small village on the western coast of Norway, a boy named Eirik shivers beneath a fur blanket. He is barely 13, but tomorrow he will join the men on a raid for the first time. His father tells him it will make him strong. His mother says nothing, only tying a small hammer of Thor around his neck for luck. But Eirik has seen the warriors return before, some limping, some missing fingers, some not at all. He wonders if luck will be enough. For the Vikings, death was always one step away. The first thing you must understand about Viking life is that peace was a luxury no one could afford. A Viking's life was as sharp as the blade of his axe, always ready to cut, always at risk of being broken. Take Eirik's uncle, Sigurd. A giant of a man, as strong as an ox and twice as stubborn. He had survived 5 raids and was feared even by the warriors of Jarl Hakon. But one evening, as he was drinking mead in the longhouse, a stranger accused him of stealing a horse 3 summers ago. Insult was a wound to honor, and in Viking society, wounds needed blood to heal. Before anyone could react, the hall exploded in violence. Wooden bowls flew, ale splattered the walls, and steel clashed against steel. Sigurd was quick, but not quick enough. The stranger's dagger found his ribs. By the time the fight was over, Sigurd lay in the dirt, staring at the wooden beams above, his fingers twitching as if still gripping his axe. And just like that, one of the village's strongest warriors was gone. A Viking didn't just fear dying in battle. He feared betrayal, revenge, and the ever-present code of honor that turned old grudges into fresh graves. Even at home, with no swords drawn, danger was never far away. But if swords and axes didn't get you, the land would. Scandinavia was no gentle mother. The winters were long and brutal, with winds that could strip the skin from your bones. Food was scarce, and those who could not farm or fish simply did not survive. Eirik learned this the hard way when his father took him hunting one frozen morning. They had only one arrow left, and the deer before them was their only hope for meat. His father whispered, "Steady your hand. This is the difference between hunger and a full belly." The arrow flew. It missed. That night, there was no feast, only a thin broth made from old fish bones. Eirik's stomach twisted in hunger, and he understood being strong wasn't just about swinging a sword. It was about enduring, about finding a way to survive even when the gods seemed to turn their backs. Many imagine the Vikings as warriors first, but most of them were farmers, fishermen, or traders. And no matter how many battles they fought, they always had to return to the same harsh reality. If the crops failed, if the fish did not come, if the winter was too cruel, no amount of raiding could change that. In the end, the Vikings did not just fight men. They fought the world itself. Have you ever been caught in a storm so fierce that the sky and sea became one, and you could no longer tell which way was up? That was just another day for a Viking sailor. Eirik had never been this far from home. He clutched the side of the longship, his knuckles white, as the waves tossed them like driftwood. The storm had come out of nowhere, the kind that turned even the most fearless warriors into desperate men whispering prayers to Njord, the god of the sea. "Hold the sail, you useless goat," bellowed Eirik the Red, the ship's captain, as another monstrous wave crashed over them. The mast creaked, threatening to snap, and the freezing salt water clawed at Eirik's face. He thought of the stories ships swallowed whole, men lost forever, their souls wandering the deep. The Vikings were legendary seafarers, but make no mistake, every journey was a gamble. They had no compasses, no detailed maps. They relied on the stars, the color of the water, the flight of birds. Sometimes, they tossed bits of driftwood into the sea, watching how the waves moved around them to guess their position. It was clever, but no match for the wrath of the ocean. When the storm finally passed, they found themselves far from where they intended. But they were alive. And for a Viking, that was always enough. If you're born with a wooden bowl, don't expect to ever drink from a silver one. That was what Eirik's mother always said. and he understood why. In their world, your place in society was set the moment you took your first breath. The Jarls, powerful chieftains, held the land, the wealth, and the warriors. Below them were the carls, the farmers and craftsmen, men like Eirik's father. They worked hard, fought when needed, but would never rise above their station. And at the very bottom were the thralls' slaves. Eirik had grown up seeing thralls beaten for moving too slowly, sleeping in the barn like animals, eating scraps while their masters feasted. They were war captives, people taken from distant lands, sold and traded like livestock. Some were lucky enough to buy their freedom. Most died as property. One winter, Eirik saw a young thrall, a girl from the east, collapse in the snow while carrying a sack of grain. Her master kicked her, cursed her, but she did not get up. She was dead. No one mourned. No one cared. By the next morning, the body was gone, likely fed to the pigs. Not all Vikings were warriors, but every Viking knew that if you were weak, the world would crush you. Vikings are demons. They eat the hearts of their enemies. That's what the English monks wrote. And to be fair, sometimes they weren't far from the truth. The Vikings' reputation was built on blood. When they raided, they didn't just steal, they burned, they killed, they made sure their names would never be forgotten. And yet, they weren't just mindless brutes. They were traders, explorers, skilled craftsmen. Eirik saw this firsthand when his ship arrived in Miklagard, the great city of Constantinople. Here, the same men who had slit throats in England now bargained like merchants, selling fur and amber in exchange for silk and spices. Even the mighty Byzantine emperor hired Viking warriors as his personal bodyguards, the Varangian Guard. But no matter how much gold they made, the world would always see them as savages. Once, when Eirik was in a market, a Greek merchant whispered to his son, "Don't look them in the eyes, boy. They drink blood." Eirik laughed. Only on feast days. The merchant paled. Eirik didn't bother correcting him. Let them fear the Vikings. Fear was a weapon, after all. Every Viking knew one thing. Your fate was already woven. No man escapes his destiny. Eirik's grandmother used to tell him that the Norns, the weavers of fate, had already decided the day of his death. It didn't matter how strong he was, how many battles he won. When the thread was cut, it was over. That thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it made Vikings fearless. When a sickness swept through their village one winter, the people did not blame bad luck. They blamed the gods. The old seeress, her eyes white and blind, declared that Thor was angry, that a blood sacrifice was needed. So they led a goat to the altar. When that wasn't enough, they led a man. Eirik watched as the victim, an old thrall, was tied to the stone, the priest's blade glinting in the firelight. The man did not scream. Perhaps he believed Valhalla awaited him. Perhaps he knew that struggling would only make his death longer. The blood ran down the altar. The sickness did not stop. The gods were unpredictable, cruel even, but the Vikings never questioned them. To live in doubt was to live in fear, and a Viking would rather die than be afraid.